Okay, so yeah, I was asked to talk about taxonomies and linked agents. So I'm going to give a lot of background information, and then I'm going to go talk about some of the special things that we've done. So moving on. So you need to know these two concepts. When we talk about Drupal as a content management system, it's there to manage content, right? And when you get into talking about Drupal and what's going on here, you'll hear references to nodes and taxonomy terms and a variety of other things. But when you come into this space, these are two of the things that you need to be aware of. Nodes are generally your content. It is your metadata about a thing. So I have a picture of a cat or a dog, and the node is all the fields that describe that picture. So you have a title, you have a description, the date it was created, that sort of thing. That said, content types are basically definitions of what fields you'll have available. You could almost think of it as your metadata schema for a bit of content. So our repository item that Islandora defaults provides includes things like description and linked agent and date created and subject fields and these sort of things. And the content types control not only what fields are available, but also the form that's used to create and edit these records, and also how they're displayed. And you get multiple different display modes. So I want to display these fields when you are using the OpenSeaDragon viewer, or I want these fields when you're indexing, or I want these fields when you are displaying in a list that this item belongs to, right? And taxonomy terms in Drupal land are there to categorize and classify your content. So you can think of, the traditional taxonomy terms vocabulary that is provided is just tags. These are just words that describe the thing that I'm trying to work with. And vocabularies are like content types in that they are controlling what metadata that you can have about these terms and also how they're displayed. One of the other special things about taxonomy terms is it has a built-in optional hierarchy as well. So if you think about things like the art and architecture thesaurus, where you have terms that are nested within other terms and it has that hierarchy, you can do that same thing with the taxonomy term vocabulary. So just to get that terminology out there for those who aren't familiar with them. Another important concept to understand when we're talking about taxonomies are entity references. This basically says there's a relationship between this thing and that thing. We mostly use it for relationships between content. So my picture of a dog and the fact that it belongs to another thing, which is a collection, or another thing, which is a taxonomy term of cats, or another taxonomy term of dogs, right? And so if this over here, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but I have a dog and a cat node over here in this little box, and it has two fields. It has a member of field, which is an entity reference to what collections it belongs in. And it has another entity reference field of subject, which connects it to the cat's term and to the dog's term. We also use these references to connect these metadata descriptions to the files associated with it through what are referred to as media entities. And so it's just another, it's another type that has its own fields, it has entity references. So this media is referencing the metadata that it's associated to. So it's a media of the cat and dog description, and it has a reference to an actual file. So an actual set of bits called the image file in this case, which is the nice picture of the dog and the cat. And I won't go into all the intricacies of how we've modeled all of that. It's just important to note that we have different things that are referencing each other. And that's how these work. So when I'm creating a record, so I want to describe this picture of the cat and the dog, I want to add subject. So I start typing in cats and it shows there's a cat's term. I can add it. There's a dog's term. I can add the dog's term. And as Jordan mentioned, if you were here earlier talking about how the typed relation field works, where we have the ID, you see cats has the ID 27. It was already in there. It was already set up as a term that we have. So I could just type for it. It auto-completed. That was great. But what if you haven't added a subject term yet? Maybe I want to add friendship as a subject term that this picture is representing. Well, Drupal can auto create new terms in this form, which is great because I don't have to go to a new screen and say, okay, taxonomy terms, list the terms, add the term, enter the info, save it, and then go back and then research for it. I can just enter it, and it's saved, which is great. But there's this big but here. If the field can draw from multiple vocabularies, which it can do, we can only auto create that term in a single vocabulary. So here on the right-hand side, I have the configuration form for the subject field. And it says it's a reference, it's an entity reference, and I can create new entities if they don't exist, but they're all going to be put in subject currently. And whereas if I'm using this and using the autocomplete, it's pulling from corporate body, from family, from geographic location, from person, from subject, right? So we have this limitation with the form, which is kind of frustrating there. So you might, say, why did you do this? In part, it's because this is the workflow that we came from at our institution, coming from Content DM, where people who are creating records couldn't just add a term on the fly anyway. They already had to go to a different spot to configure, add a term to the controlled vocabulary before it was available, and then come back here and then enter the value. So it wasn't a big deal for us to get around this limitation because we already had workflows around that based off of previous systems. But we also recognize that this is a problem for people who are, small shops just coming in. They just want to create a thing and they don't want to go other places. So this is a known issue. We would like to resolve it, but we unfortunately don't have a good solution for this yet. And keep in mind, it is a pain if you've added a term to one vocabulary and you want it to belong into a different one. So if you want to change a term vocabulary, there's no good way to do this on the front end. Because right now what you have to do is you have to delete the term from the vocabulary, go to the other vocabulary and create a new term, and then you have to go edit all those records again, which is a pain. You can do this from the back end, but again, we were trying to avoid that in the first place. And you can still do it, and you can lose fields. So there's no good way to do this. So the best solution is prevention at the moment. So really what you probably want to do is disable create referenced entities for the time being until we can find a better way to get around this. So just side note, it can be done. It's not safe to do it. Oh, okay. So I already had a slide for about. So why would you want to create that vocabulary? So one of the things that you could do is to just say, I have just a single subjects vocabulary, and I'm going to put my people in there. I'm going to put my geographic locations in there. I'm going to put all my subject terms in there. It's just going to be one big happy vocabulary, so I don't have to deal with this mess. And that's a perfectly valid solution. You can do that. That's perfectly fine. That's, as it says at the bottom, your site doesn't have to use all these vocabularies that Islandora defaults provides if it's just going to complicate things for you. But there was a purpose behind the madness here. Why did we create so many vocabularies? we wanted our vocabularies to have different fields and RDF properties. So for example, a vocabulary, because we can define fields for these terms, we can add things like preferred names, alternate names, birthdays, death dates, biographical notes about these people, which are fields that I might not include on my subject vocabulary. And it might be slightly different for the corporate term, corporate bodies vocabulary, because sure, they have inception dates and death dates, but those aren't the same as birth and death dates, semantically speaking, right? Even though they also have preferred names and alternate names, it's not quite the same. So we wanted different vocabulary so we could describe these elements of these things that we were using to link to our vocabulary, to link from our descriptions of our records. Geographic locations has a completely different set of fields that we want to use, including geographic coordinates, so we can link this to a map, right? The other reason why we did this is because it was similar to how ArchiveSpace structures and organizes their data, and we're pulling in data from ArchiveSpace into our site as well. So this is why we have so many vocabularies in the first place. And because we wanted all those features, also recognizing that, at least for us, we have to go through this workaround of creating new terms through a separate workflow, rather than being able to create it from the form. So there's a trade-off. You don't have to use that feature. You can pick for your own site. So transitioning, so one of the things that we haven't talked about today, at least for those who are still getting their introduction, one of the things that we get from Islandora, and the reason why we have things set up, is that we are taking this Drupal content and we are transforming it into JSON LD so it can persist in the Fedora repository system, which is now triple store based, a linked data platform, I should say. And what we do is we take each of those fields and we map them to an RDF predicate. So Drupal's title field becomes DC terms title. And this is the same is true with vocabularies, where we can take the name property of a taxonomy term and map it to whatever RDF predicate we want to use for that as well. But what if you have a lot of potential predicates that you want to use? Say like 270 different mark relators. Because right now, how Drupal is set up with the entity reference and the RDF module, you would have to create a separate entity reference field for every single one of those relators that you wanted to use, if you wanted to use just core Drupal entity reference field. Number one, that's a whole lot of fields. And so it would make the form a mess and it would complicate display. It really is not an ideal solution to create so many fields, especially when many of these relators may never be used. And you might say, well, let's start with the smaller selection of relators and we'll add as we need, but that requires you to then, okay, let me go in, add the field, update the RDF mapping, just because you wanted to add a new relator on the fly. So what did we do? We created this new field type. So this is an extension of entity reference to where we can say, hey, yes, it's an entity reference, but we want to describe that reference. We want to make it a bit more specific than just a term that I'm linked to. So one of the examples of how we use this field is for this field type is the linked agent field that we have in Islandora defaults, which says, hey, I still get my autocomplete because I'm looking up a agent or a term that exists in a vocabulary somewhere. And once I autocomplete it, I can also select from this dropdown which mark relator I want to use. Is this linked agent an abridger, an actor, an adapter, it's a creator, artist, whatever it is, I can select it. And this is relatively easy to configure in that you can add your relators in a field configuration. So I can take a typed relationship field and I can use it for agents. I can use it for, what else did we use it for? But anything where you would want to swap out the predicate for you, we can use it for that. And so behind the scenes, we do the magic of saying, hey, when we push this out into RDF, instead of being the creator field, it takes that creator predicate and swaps it out for the predicate that you've selected in this form. So we've done this to try to, condense the number of fields that you need to use. We've gone from 270 mark relators all the way down to a single field that we can use, and we can change the relator as needed for it. Another example of why we created this is that we wanted to create relationships between our different agents. So there is an ontology of agent relationships called Agrelon. It has 76 different ways that one person can be related to an organization. We currently use 27 of them in our current repository metadata that we have. So for example, that we can say that this one person in our repository has an ancestor that's also in our repository, or they have a child, or they have an offspring or parent or sibling or spouse. Because in a lot of cases, we document families and their relationships to each other. And unlike in our previous content DM system, where you would be able to say, okay, it's this person, and find all the stuff associated with this person, I can now say, okay, here's this person, but hey, we also know about this other individual, and they're related to each other some way. And I can navigate between them. So there's a bunch of also organizational relationships as well. Has acquaintance, has an employee, has an employer, founder, member of, member of. So a lot of different relationships that we really couldn't explore in our previous content management system, that now, because we're using these typed relationships, instead of having to create 76 different fields on my person vocabulary, I just have to create a single relationship field and say I can define that relationship when I create it. So for example, I can say that Seth Shaw in my repository is alumni of the University of Michigan School of Information, if it's in my corporate body vocabulary. By default, we include Islandora defaults, brings in the controlled access terms defaults, which includes the schema.org ontology for relationships. We've changed ours, which is simply updating this field right here instead of using schema to use the Agrelon relationship, because we wanted more specificity in ours. So what does this look like? If you go to our site and you search for John Lewis, we have an agent record for John Lewis, an American politician, civil rights leader. It's that second result down there. If we click on his name, we see in our repository his birth date and death date, his description. We can, for those of you who know EAC CPF, we can pull all of our bio information and put it in here. Or if you're EAD bio notes, you can associate it with a person. Put it right here so that people can find this individual and find digital objects they're associated with, find archival collections that they're associated with. We also link out to the various authority sources. If you want to know their Wikidata information, click out to Wikidata. There they are. We also, of course, link them with people they know or that they're affiliated with, because we use this typed relationship and we didn't have to create 76 entity reference fields to do this. We just have one field, which can contain multiple types of relationships. So he is affiliated with the Democratic Party, and he knows this Jesse Jackson. Well, if we click on Jesse Jackson, similar thing. Here's his birth date. Here's a description that we know about it. He's an African-American civil rights activist and politician. Here's digital objects associated with him. There's his NACO authority file, but he's also the founder of Rainbow/Push Coalition. Well, maybe I don't know. I knew Jesse Jackson, but I didn't know about this coalition. Well, let's look and find out more information about them. They're also known by RPC. They were founded in 1997 by Jesse Jackson. Again, there's more digital objects associated with that association. And we plan on filling out more of these bios as we have student capability to write these notes and fill them out. But the point is we have the capability to do this because we use these linked references to each other. And we're using these linked agent fields. So that's a very overlaying review of what these fields are and how they work. So we will open up to questions from there.
That's awesome. Thanks, Seth. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we can take them now. We've got like 40 minutes left. So questions for Seth, questions for Danny, questions for Mark, anybody really.
So I noticed that Mark put a taxonomy manager in there. So to move, it currently does not support moving from one vocabulary to another because it uses the term merge for this, if I remember correctly. And it does not go from one vocabulary to another. It can manage terms within a vocabulary and move them in the hierarchy, but it doesn't go from one vocabulary to another. Because I looked at that like yesterday, just to make sure that I wasn't doing that.
I'm going to start with a really basic question here.
Yeah.
We just, like I said, we just really got started with Islandora, and I was inputting fields in as tests. And the question I have is, when you use the subject field, it's expecting whatever you put in there to be already in the system somewhere. Mm-hmm. Where is that added?
Yeah. So let me actually let me share my screen really quick. Again, just a different tab this time. Oops.
And I probably just was making it more difficult than it is, but.
So I'm going to the future.islandora here. Unlike content, which is creating the metadata records where you go to the content tab up here in the corner, for taxonomy terms, you go to structure. And down here at the bottom, you have taxonomy. And we have the subject, and of course, my little Zoom participants thing is covering my list terms. So here you can see a list of all the terms that are in here, and in future, there's not very many. So if, for example, I wanted to add friendship in here, friendship, and I actually do have the LC term over here somewhere where I was talking about friendship. Copy link URL. So imagine I had gone to LC, searched it out, and I can add it in as an authority source for my library of Congress subject headings, URI, and save. So you can create new terms like that. And then when you go and create content or edit content, so say dog and cat, which is the one I used in my example. Oops, let me use the edit button. I go down to subjects. There's friendship available. Down here. And as Danny said, at midnight, this will be wiped, and so this will no longer be about friendship. but go to dog and cat. Yep. And down below, we have our friendship subject. But if we go to the dog subject, we'll be able to see here's all the things associated with dogs. Or if we go to the friendship subject, here's all the subjects associated with dogs and cats. Yeah, and Christina put in the comment box. Oh, of course, it just scrolled on me. And it's a really small window when I'm looking at it right here. That you can move where things show up in your interface. It's just, you know, requires you to know how to set up your Drupal to do it.
If you scroll up a little further, Seth, there's a question from Amy as well. She's just wanting
so
to,
can I show what these terms look like as an object metadata? If you do a search through the regular IR interface. So I can show what the JSON LD looks like for our own site. So let me do, again, assuming I haven't started a re-annex on this because it's not public yet. John Lewis. And I'm going to, again, we have a bunch of stuff in here associated with them. And we are cleaning up agents because we accidentally loaded a whole bunch of duplicates, which we're trying to clean up right now. So I'm going to search for people named John Lewis. And for those who don't know, you can add this little magic phrase at the top of it. Go to a URL, add the underscore format equals JSON LD parameter, query on it. And this will give you the metadata that it looks like when it's sent to Fedora. So we have his name, John Lewis, schema description, same as these others, birth date, death date, has group affiliation, is this other term. So he is affiliated with, so you'll see here that we're using Agrelon for group affiliation. This other one, which happens to be a Democratic Party. So if we take that into our Drupal store, we can start doing Sparkle queries on it, that sort of thing. And our metadata librarian here, Darnell Melvin, has done a whole lot of stuff with Wikidata and Sparkle query. So he's really excited for this because there's a lot of stuff that he can do with querying Drupal stores for creating cool visualizations for exploring the data, which is enabled by having this sort of thing. I don't know if that answered your question, Amy.
I was actually sort of hoping to see what it looks like on the object metadata. So not like looking for him as a person, but like looking for something he wrote or something that he's showing up as a person in, just like how that then appears like in your facets or in whatever in the site itself. Because I don't know that all of us are really going to be doing sort of awesome Drupal store Sparkle visualizations, but these terms will be showing up in the metadata. So I wanted if you could show us an example of that.
Oh, your sound is not working, Seth, for some reason. Oh, still no.
Have I like accidentally muted Seth or something?
I don't think so. I don't see the mute. Maybe he can't hear us either. Oh.
I'm gonna like mute and then unmute him. Jiggle the cable, so to speak.
Oh no. Did you unmute him now, Danny?
It only lets me ask him to unmute.
Oh,
unmute. Did I mute myself by
No,
accident?
I did
No.
that to you to trigger this. Yay,
No,
I
but
fixed it.
we lost you a few minutes back there, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm sorry. What I realized is for some reason this laptop, which is I'm using a different computer than normal, for some reason the mute button on the keyboard activated without me touching it. So I apologize for that, which also meant I missed the end of Amy's question.
Yeah, so I had just wanted to see what it looks like when you're displaying one of these linked agent terms as part of the object metadata, as opposed to sort of more specifically, you know, as this entity that you can do really cool linked data like visualizations with.
Yeah.
We're not all doing that, but we're all going to be showing the metadata. So that's what I was interested in seeing an example of.
Yeah, so here's one of our digital object records right here. Photographs of Venetian rallies, culinary union. And they went a bit nuts with the subjects here. But these are all linked subjects here. Let me actually find one where someone is a creator of it. Let me think of a good example of that. We don't use creator as much as we probably should. So I'm thinking of a lot of examples that don't include. Let me come over here. Actually, let me go to culinary, because we also use this for our archival objects. Culinary Workers Union is a subject of a lot of things, but I think they're also listed as a creator for a number of things as well, including the photographs collection here, which again, this is our pull-in with archive space that we use this same field for, but you'll notice that our creator contributor links here is Culinary Workers Union is a creator. Whereas if I had gone in and went to edit this, I'm not logged in, of course, which is why I can't see the edit tab. But it would show me that option here. Well, let me stop sharing and log in so I can show you that. Actually, we might just show it on this one. Let me create myself as an agent here. Taxonomy. I am a person. I do have an LC, a NACO thing, but I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. So I won't bother entering it. And I'll be super generic for folks. I won't give you the full birth date, but here's the year. So if I now go, and I'm going to claim ownership of one of these, a dog and cat chair, since I've already been editing it. And I go to linked agent, say it's a photograph, so it's a photographer. Seth Shaw, autocomplete. So I would create it. Go way down here to save. We can now see that I am, in theory at least, according to this record, which is going to be gone at midnight, because that's nice because it's not accurate, would say that I'm the photographer. And I can click through to it, and I'm associated with this photograph, cat, dog, and I have my birth date. And we have these different pieces of metadata. I mentioned the JSON LD. And you'll note that it is, there's the photograph for later, the marker later for me, and there's my URL for my record. I'm not sure if I showed you what you wanted to see, Amy. I apologize if I'm not getting the point across.
No, yeah, that's what I wanted to see was the linked agent category and then how it appears under there so that, you know, that's
And if you want,
show up for anyone who's wanting to use it for the kind of basic display as opposed to sort of the really cool additional linked data options you can do.
Yeah, and if you do want to change, what relators are available, like I said, moving from schema to agrelon, let me update, at least show persons. We're going to manage the fields, and it's just a typed relationship field here, and of course this keeps getting in the way. It would just be adding all the agrelon down here, or replacing these that if they exist. So it is fairly easy to update what types of relationships you want to have. If you want to use a different vocabulary, you don't want to use mark relators, you want to use something else, whatever you want. I hope that helped. So I'm trying to, this chat box is not very helpful. So I'm scrolling up to see if there's something I missed.
There was a question here from Julie again. It was, where does the linked agents get updated?
So I think I just showed that for
Yeah,
the
you might have,
agents.
sorry.
Oh, I did it for agents there. No, it's fine. I'm great that we're going ahead, but for a particular content type, so for our content, we're going to manage fields again. Get that out of the way. And this is the linked agent is a typed relationship. And we scroll down, and these are the available relationships. So if you wanted to simplify that for me, you didn't want to have all 200 plus mark relators, you can simplify this list and just delete items that you know you're not going to use. And then you could, if you decide you need it after all, add it back. Okay, a bunch of these comments were sound wasn't working. I apologize.
We got it figured out though, it's fine.
Seth, I had a question about, you said you had just tried out that taxonomy manager just recently.
Yeah.
For term merging, did that work for the linked agent field where there's like the agent and then also a relator?
Thank you. And I had a note to mention this, but I didn't have the presenter notes up. It does not.
And sugar. Okay.
Yeah. We have the reason being is because Taxonomy Manager relies on term merge, which relies on yet another module, which has hard coded to only look for entity references. And it only works for node to taxonomy term relationships. So it wouldn't be able to update any of these term to term relationships that we have in our agents either. This is fixable, but it's finding the time to figure out how to do it exactly to do it. Because what we would have to do is we would have to override the term that the term finder service. So what we'd be doing is we'd be adding a new service to controlled access term module to be able to say, hey, we're going to use this service instead to be able to merge those together. So it is possible, but it's going to take some developer time to do it.
All right, good to know.
Yeah, it was on my list for a while to look at, and then when I started to dig into it, I was disappointed that they hard-coded a few things, but it is wrapped into a service, so we are able to override it.
Does anybody got anything else?
Okay. Okay, so Chris had asked a question. If you edit a term in taxonomy, does that update it in every content record that it uses? Rosie answered yes, but it's also a yes and no. So the way that this plays out, it will update all the displays. So if you go and look at that object, a different object where you had updated it, the related term, it will update in the display automatically with the whole cache management there. Where this doesn't update is in your search index, depending on how you have it set up. So when you create your search index, you have all of the, one of the fields that you have is called the rendered item, which basically does a full text search on the way that item looks when you look at it in the page, right? So if you tag something with the search with a subject, it's now going to be available as part of the full text search for that item. However, if you update a search term, it does not tell the indexer to re-index that item so that search term shows up in the fixed text, which isn't a terrible thing because hopefully you're relying on facets instead, which will update appropriately. So yes and no. By and large, yes, but there are some things like that full text search indexer that it doesn't update with properly.
Is it also the case, Seth, that you would have to re-index to get, never mind, I was going to talk about the linked data RDF, but the URI isn't going to change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about that. It'll update, because what it'll do is it'll say, hey, re-index that term in Fedora, and so yeah, that would go just fine. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, facets might be an issue because usually what you're faceting on is the label, and you might need to do we might need to look at triggering re-indexes of nodes based on that. I have not experimented with that though, so there might be a facet issue, update issue.
So Nigel is working on our field type stuff with us, and he also wrote the advanced search and worked with facets a lot. Anyway, I'm just mentioning because like our custom module has a bunch of stuff about indexing taxonomy terms like down in the like bottom of the module file. So like he may have figured some stuff about that out. So he may be a good resource for that. You're muted again, Seth.
Oh dear, he's stuck. There was, I don't know if you want to type out an answer, Seth. There was a question from Chris about re-indexing the full text search, unless you already answered that. It's a test of your typing skills.
I can always mute and unmute you again, which might, I don't know if that actually did anything or if it was just all on your end, but I'll try.
I'm going to hit stop